Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to continue the build here on my SBX-2 Nitro buggy. I got the diff, all three diffs out here. Always start all my builds with the diffs. So let's open them up and get all of our parts laid out here. I like to separate all my parts, pieces, and make sure everything is here, accounted for. Make sure you got all your screws, your shims. There should be. Make sure none of your shims are stuck together. Sometimes you get a couple stuck together, so rub them and make sure they're not. Should be two of these thick ones, these bigger round ones, and then there should be at least 4 of these small ones that go behind the satellite gears. This rear diff had 5 of these small ones. 2 of them were stuck together, so like I said, make sure you don't end up with any stuck together. Always double check that. Make sure you pay attention to, on the WRC buggy, make sure you pay attention to the diff cups themselves, as the center diff cup is different from the front and rear diff cup. So make sure you're paying attention to your parts when you're laying them out here. Yeah, there were 6 of those small shims, and that one, those small ones seem to very oftentimes get a couple shims stuck. They get stuck together. They are kind of oily, so it's easy for them to get kind of attached to each other. So see the center diff cup and the front and rear diff cup is quite a bit different. The center diff cup is bigger. Front and rears are the same, but the center is bigger. Every other part, all the internals of the diff are the same, but the cup itself is different. So pay attention for that. All right, and my bad. Forgot to grab my NMB bearings. I use J&T Bearing Company J&T bearings throughout all of my cars, and have for about the last 5+ years or so. Very high quality, good bearings. So I'll be setting the stock bearings to the side, as I will not be using those. just set those to the side for now. Okay, so got all your parts laid out and accounted for. There is a couple things, tips that I would like to show you guys and discuss about building your diffs and making sure you get the best performing car after it's fully done and built, and there's no kind of surprises or ill handling things you got to work through. So couple things. First thing, make sure you take all the out drives and run them into all of the cups and gears, and make sure there's no flashing from the manufacturing or on the metal yokes and stuff. So make sure that everything is, and apply pressure to it, push in on it, and make sure it can't, you don't feel any bind or drag to it. And I'll try that with every single part. You want it to be super free. Every once in a while, I'd say 90% of them are good, but every once in a while you will get some that have some burrs in there, and you'll have to clean it up. So just so that you know for sure your kit's getting built to perfection, you just double check all this stuff. This is little details that can go a long way in your end result on your new kit build. So alright, so all of that feels good. The next step we're gonna do is gonna be cleaning up the little bit of flashing that gets on this gasket surface from the mold. And it's just it's not just another one of those small details that make you have a much better end product. So just take a piece of really fine sandpaper. You have to have a super flat surface, and you're not really going to take any material off. You're just cleaning the surface. So you're just going to lightly twist this onto that sandpaper, applying a light pressure, and you're just cleaning up any flashing that is on the outside surface, or any uneven, maybe around the threads or something. So, and then if there's any burrs in any of the channels, I will take an X-Acto and clean those out as well. And then just blow it out nice and clean. And then one more thing I will do to the cup before I build the diff is I will run all the screws into the cup and thread, make sure I get all the holes pre-threaded. Alright, so that is a ready to use cup. So I'll do that to each one of the cups. And this is something that is really hit and miss. Every once in a while you'll get one of these cups that just looks super clean right out of the mold, and then one time you'll get one that has quite a bit of flashing on it. It's just hit and miss. It's just a little bit of extra attention to detail when you're building your kit, and you'll get a much better product at the end and throughout the life of the car. Looks good. Same thing. When you're threading your screws through, make sure you're careful in getting the screw straight. Alright, our cup ready to go. And then there's a perfect example of perfection from a cup. That thing doesn't need anything. It's 100% clean, perfect mold. Like I said, sometimes you get them that look like this. Other times you got to clean them up a little bit. But either way, you always want to just make sure you check that. So all I got to do to this one is thread the holes, and it'll be ready to go. Alright, so the next step is going to be to just give a quick inspection of all the gears and make sure all the teeth are nice and clean and came out of the machine like they were supposed to, with no burrs on the teeth, nice clean cut gears, which I've never seen one from WRC that wasn't. But it's still something you just go ahead and check. It's just that little bit of extra detail when you're building your kit goes a long ways. Okay, so now then we'll start by building the cup side of the diffs first. I like to take, I use white lithium grease. I use Lucas Oil Products. White lithium grease is super good. That's what I use on a lot of the stuff on the car that requires grease is the white lithium from Lucas Oil. So I'm going to put grease where the O-ring sits. I'm going to put grease inside here and spread it around where the outdrive goes. And then I'll also put grease in the groove of the outdrive as well. Alright, so like I said, where the O-ring goes, and then inside there where the outdrive goes. Make sure it's well greased. And the same thing to all the gears as well. Okay, and then when it comes to the outdrive, that little groove right there, that groove in the outdrive is actually a grease channel. So that's where you want to apply the grease, is in that groove. So just spread a layer around that groove. And it doesn't have to be perfect or super neat and clean. Just wipe off the excess when you put it into the cup or the gear. Alright, now that all those are greased up, all we need to do is throw some bearings on. Okay, so just take your cup, put your bearing on, take the outdrive, and when I put it in, I'll spread the grease all around, twist it, and just kind of make sure the grease is equally applied all the way around. And then once I get the diff fully assembled, I'll actually wipe off that grease ring that builds up right there, so it don't splatter all over the place and make the drive shaft bind be affected. So make sure you clean all that excess off. Make sure that's free like it should be. And then I'll take that kind of ball that gets built up on the top of the outdrive when you push it in. Wipe the majority of that off. And then take the O-ring. Start it on with your finger. And then use a 7mm nut driver. And it goes right over the outdrive, and you should be able to kind of work that O-ring down into place till it seats fully. Use your big shim on there, and then you'll want to use some sort of needle nose pliers to get this little pin into the groove. Alright, so then once you get that pin in the groove, just center it up. And then once I get to this point, what I'll do to make sure that the O-ring is 100% seated into the groove is basically take this and pull out while I'm twisting. And that right there allows the pin to apply the pressure to the washer and make sure that the O-ring is fully seated. And then if all checks out, then you're good to go. And so just set that aside and we'll go and continue on with the others. Okay, there's another one. So one little tip, if you put the washer in and you're pulling out on this and spinning it and you feel like a click, that's a burr that is on the washer, is what that is. And that happens from time to time. So if that does happen, all you have to do is flip the washer over to the other side and it solves that most times, unless you had a burr on both sides of the washer, in which case you would need to either find where the burr is and remove it, or you would need to replace the shim. In which case I've never had it happen. It's usually only one side that has a burr. Like that one, flipped it over and it's absolutely smooth, which is what you're looking for. Okay, so let's continue building. I'll do one of the front and rears on the video, and I'll do the center and one of the front and rears. Okay. when you squish the O-ring down, it's gonna squish out a lot of extra grease. Most cases I don't worry about it, I just leave it. The washer is gonna go over it, spread it around on top of the O-ring, and it's just gonna help make the O-ring last longer in most cases, so there's not really a negative to having it there. So dang, another washer. Alright, so we're gonna actually do a dry build of the diff first with no fluid. I always recommend build your diffs dry before you put fluid in them when they're brand new. On a brand new kit build, always build your diffs dry first. That way you can check and make sure that everything is smooth and the gears ain't crunchy or have no drag or bind, anything like that. It's very important that you do that and check that, make sure that there's no burr on that washer that it causes a bind in the diff. You want that when that washer is spinning on that, that pin is spinning on that washer, that it can't ever bind up. That is going to cause massive handling issues with your car if it does. So make sure you're checking that. Okay. So, like I said, we'll always do a dry build on the diff before actually assembling it with oil. So pop in the big gear there. On these small gears, when you put them on to the cross pins, make sure you check that they spin freely and can pull in and out freely on there. And then put one of the thin shims behind each one of the gears. Okay. That all checks out good. Like I said, most of this stuff is usually always good and there's nothing you need to do, but it's still good practice to double check all of it and make sure that your car is no surprises and perfect first time hitting the track. So like I said, doing a dry build on the diff. So we'll go ahead and bolt it all the way together. Being a dry build, when I do that to check, I only do 2 screws. I'll just go diagonal across from each other, and then you just want to check and see how smooth the diff is and feel if there's any crunch in the gears. It's more important to make sure you're just spinning one out drive than spinning both. Spinning both, you're always going to feel a much freer, smoother diff. So you can really feel the gears a lot more by holding the diff and only spinning one out drive. So I like to just spin a few times fast and feel how smooth the gears transition through the teeth, and then spin kind of slow and make sure just all of that action through the gears is nice and smooth, which this one is. I expected it to be, but I still, like I said, I always double check that when I build a new kit. And there is, every once in a while, you will build a kit that needs a little extra attention. But in most cases, all that stuff is taken care of for you from the factory, so that it builds super easy. So yeah, so we'll dump the gears back out of there, and this is going to be my front diff, so I'm going to go ahead and build it up with my oil. I use PT RC oils in all of my cars, so my go-to diff fluid is going to be 10,000 for the front diff. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some in here down at the bottom, and that's just so that air can't get trapped below that gear, the lower gear, before I put it in. So I just put a little bit of oil down in there, just enough to cover the whole bottom, and then I'll go back and put my big sun gear back in. Once I put that gear in, I'll just kind of spin it to make sure I push any air away from being trapped so that it can come up out of there. And then you're got to go ahead and put in your cross pins and satellite gears. So just make sure that they drop right in with no catch or nothing, and they just fall right in nice and free. And make sure that you get the slot in the cross pin perfectly lined up. Perfectly seated. It should seat perfectly and be 100% crossed flat. So once you get it put together like that, I'll just top the fluid off till it's right at the, maybe just below the top of the satellite gears. About like so. So it's full, but it's not going to be over full where I have to take a bunch out when I put the other gear in. So it's just below the top side of those small satellite gears. And I might just spin this just maybe like a quarter turn, just in case there's any air bubbles that get trapped down in there underneath some of the small gears or in between the teeth or whatever. It works those around. I'll just let this set for a couple minutes and we'll go do the dry build onto the center diff. Basically the exact same thing we just did on that diff. Same process. Just want to make sure that everything's working perfectly smooth and free before we put the oil into the diff. And then you can't, once you put the oil into the diff, you can't really feel the gears properly, because you also have the drag of the oil. So to be able to properly feel the drag of the actual teeth of the gears, you have to do it with the gears completely dry so you can feel them. There we go. The spur gear was a little bit tight onto the cup. No big deal though. Okay, so fully assembled, and then we're gonna check and make sure it's butter smooth, which I can already tell that is insanely smooth. Yeah, that is, you're probably not going to find a smoother diff on the market than that right there. So that's super smooth, it feels good. We'll go ahead and pull it back apart and fill it up with fluid. Alright, so my go-to fluid for the center diff is 8,000. So same exact process as we did on the front end, the front diff. Just put a little bit down in here. Cover the bottom. Make sure there's no big air bubbles get in that fluid. If there is, wait till they get out before you put the gear on. That way they don't get trapped down in there. We'll go ahead and start assembling. Make sure that when you push those gears onto those pins, that it goes all the way down on there. Ours go on the pins super easy, so it's not really a thing with our diffs, but some of the other companies, the gear can be a little bit tight on the pins, so make sure you are getting it pushed all the way onto the pin. Okay. Same thing as that. Even though there's a lot more room in this diff cup above the gears before it is the top of the cup, the center diff you don't want to fill that all the way up to the top. And the reason why is because of how the spur gear is designed, where this the gasket's actually recessed, and this goes down inside. This little bit here goes down inside the diff and takes up that extra room that's in there. So you still want to fill the center diff up the same way you do the front and rear, where you just fill it just below the top of those small satellite gears. That way you're not overfilling the diff. If you overfill the diff, it will also cause you some major handling issues. Once it gets hot and the diff builds pressure, it's probably going to cause it to leak. It'll push out the extra fluid because once it builds up pressure, it's going to have to go somewhere, and you probably end up with a mess. Plus your car, the diff's not going to work properly. So let that sit, and this one here is ready to bolt together. This is something I do. It's probably not necessary, but all these channels behind all of the cross pins go into, I kind of tilt the diff and let the fluid fill those up. Like I said, it probably doesn't even matter, but it's just one of the things that I do and I've always done. It's pretty slow going when you're using the thicker fluids to do this. Okay. Alrighty. Now them are all filled up. I want to go ahead and take a rag and wipe that top surface completely dry. You want that top surface where that gasket is going to go. You don't want that wet, you want it dry. That's how you're going to get the best seal. And then to finish up bolting it together, take your other gear and drop it right on top of, right into the diff. And this is where you want to check your fluid level, which looks like I had absolutely perfect. I've done a few of these, so I can eyeball pretty good. But you don't want, with your fluid level, you don't want it to be, when you put that gear in there, you want it to be at the edge of the top flat part of the gear, but you don't want it to be coming over that. So you want it just below the top of that gear. And then once you've got it, your oil level just right, where it's full but not over full, it's just about go ahead and bolting it together. And I would say if you do use a hand drill, be careful not to just run them in super fast and get the plastic hot. You know, as I'm kind of tapping the trigger and kind of keeping it going in slower, trying to make sure I don't overheat the plastic. And I would say make sure that you also use your clutch on a very soft setting and always finish all your screws by hand. Okay, now that should be a perfectly smooth diff. All I need to do is take a rag and wipe this little bit of grease off from around the out drive. and it's perfectly built front diff. Since I'm building them all three at the same time and the front and rear look the same, you can just take a Sharpie, you can mark that with an F and you're good to go. You know, you won't get it mixed up. So now we can move on and do the same exact thing to the center diff. So the center diff's exactly the same as it was with the front diff. So even though there's that extra plastic material for the cup, the height, you still don't want the fluid going over top of the gear. So when you put the gear in, you don't want fluid coming over the top of the flat side of the gear. If there is, you need to clean the extra out, remove some. So I have a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna, right in the center of the gear where the outdrive goes, I'll just scoop some out until I get the level where I want it. Alright, that looks good. So now just bolt it together, same as I did before, nothing fancy. Now I'll tell you guys a little tip before I end this video. I will only build these diffs putting these screws in like this when they're brand new, the first time I build them. Once I run the car and I break this diff back down to rebuild it, and I put it back together, I will be putting a drop of CA glue on each one of these screws to seal it into the plastic and use as if it's like Loctite. Because I found if for whatever reason, even if the screws tighten tight, the diff would still leak if I didn't put the drop of CA glue on the screws. Even without the screws backing out, they would still be tight. They would just, for some reason, they would still seep and leak. So putting the drop of CA glue on each one of the screws sealed the diff perfect, never have a leak. So that's a little tip for you. same thing. That's a perfectly built diff. It came out super smooth. That's all for this video. I'll build the rear diff off camera. It'll be the exact same process as the front diff. I'll be using 5,000 diff fluid for the rear diff build. That's my standard base diff setup is 10 front, 8 center, and 5 rear. So thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you back for the next video to continue this build.